the Nancy Guthrie case, if they end up getting a good profile, could be the case where, for the first time, these companies are forced to let law enforcement in?
I do. And if it's not this case, it'll be another one. It'll be the next big case where they've got a profile, they've got a DNA sample, it's not hitting in CODIS, and they need to stop that person, before they hurt anyone else. Like in Brian Kohberger's case, I believe he would have hurt more people had he not been identified through investigative genetic genealogy very quickly. So I think it's going to happen. It's really just a matter of time and what cases happen. I think it would have happened on the Charlie Kirk assassination, for instance, if they hadn't identified him quickly, or the attempted assassination of Trump. Those types of cases, they're not going to hesitate to try to get into those databases if they are stuck, because they're, really important cases, really high profile cases where they feel that they can make an exception in those cases.
At 2:28 in the morning, something inside Nancy Guthrie's home sent a signal to her phone for the very last time. Her pacemaker, the device keeping her 84-year-old heart beating in rhythm, disconnected from its app, not because it stopped working, not because she turned it off, but because Nancy was no longer close enough to her own phone for the Bluetooth to hold its connection. Her phone was still sitting inside her house. Nancy was not. Somewhere between a quiet Saturday evening and the cold early hours of a Sunday morning in Tucson, Arizona, an 84-year-old woman who could barely walk 50 yards on her own was taken out of her home. There was blood on the front doorstep. Her doorbell camera had been ripped from the wall. Her back doors were propped open, and the person who did this had already been standing at her front door 41 minutes earlier, staring directly into the lens with a mask over his face, a gun strapped to his body, and a flashlight clenched between his teeth. He was not panicking. He was not rushing. He was calm. And then he covered the camera with leaves from a potted plant and disappeared into the dark. That was more than 70 days ago. Nancy Guthrie has not been seen since. No arrest has been made. No suspect has been named. And the question that keeps this case alive is not just who did this, but how someone can vanish an elderly woman from her own home in the middle of a quiet desert suburb and leave behind almost nothing. If you are watching this and you have not yet subscribed to True Crime Investigator Alex, now is the time. This channel exists because cases like this deserve more than headlines. They deserve depth, patience, and the kind of attention that refuses to look away. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because what you are about to hear will change the way you think about this case entirely. To understand what happened to Nancy Guthrie, you have to understand the hours that came before. On the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy did something she had done many times before. She took an Uber from her home in the Catalina foothills, just north of Tucson, to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. The ride left her home at 5:32 in the evening. It was a routine visit. Dinner, games, time with family. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that would suggest the world was about to fracture. At 9:48 that night, her son-in-law, Tommaso Sioni, drove her back home. He dropped her off at a residence, and at 9:50 the garage door closed behind her. Sioni drove away. That moment, that unremarkable closing of a garage door on a Saturday night, would become the last confirmed moment that Nancy Guthrie was safe inside her own home. Tommaso Sioni was the last known person to see her alive. What happened between 9:50 in the evening and 1:47 the following morning remains one of the most troubling gaps in this entire case. That is a window of nearly 4 hours. 4 hours of silence. 4 hours of whatever was unfolding inside or around that house before anyone or anything raised an alarm. And when the first sign of trouble did emerge, it was not a scream. It was not a call to police. It was a piece of technology, quietly going dark. At 1:47 in the morning on Sunday, February 1st, Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera was disconnected. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos later confirmed that the camera was physically tampered with and had not been recovered. It was simply gone, removed from its mount by someone who clearly understood it was there and wanted it silenced. But here is what the person who did this may not have fully understood. The camera had already recorded them. Before they could shut it down, before they could cover the lens, before they could tear it from the wall, the system had captured images and fragments of video, and those fragments would later become the single most significant piece of evidence in this entire investigation. 25 minutes after the doorbell camera went dark, at 2:12 in the morning, one of the other cameras on Nancy's property detected motion. The system classified it as a person. But here is where the frustration begins. Authorities said video footage from that alert was not available. The camera logged the event but did not preserve usable imagery. Google, which manufactures the Nest camera system Nancy was using, confirmed it was working with investigators to recover whatever data it could from back-end systems. But at that moment, the only confirmed visual evidence of anyone being at that home came from the doorbell footage captured before it was disabled. Then came the pacemaker signal. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker app lost its connection to her phone. Medical experts who analyzed this detail publicly were clear about what it meant. This was not a sign that her heart had stopped. A pacemaker does not work that way. What it meant was far simpler and far more chilling. Nancy had moved beyond the Bluetooth range of her own phone. Her phone was still inside the house. She was being taken away from it. The device inside her chest was still working, still trying to communicate, still sending out its faint electronic pulse. But the person it was supposed to be connected to was no longer there. That single data point, 2:20 to 8 in the morning, became one of the most critical timestamps in the investigation. It gave authorities a narrow window between 1:47, when the doorbell camera was disabled, and 2:28, when the pacemaker signal was lost. Something happened inside that house that ended with Nancy Guthrie being removed from it. 41 minutes. That is all the time it took for someone to approach the house, neutralize the camera, enter the home, and take an 84-year-old woman out of it. 41 minutes in which a life was disrupted, a family was shattered, and a community was given no warning at all. The next morning, Nancy was supposed to watch a virtual church live stream with a friend. She was a regular churchgoer. She never missed it. When she did not appear, her friend called the family. Concern began to build. Relatives arrived at the home around 11 in the morning. They searched the house. They searched the property. Nancy was not there. Her personal belongings were inside. Her phone was there. Her medication, the daily pills she relied on for a heart condition, was untouched. There was no sign that she had packed anything, planned to go anywhere, or left voluntarily. At 12:03 in the afternoon, the family called 911. Deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived 12 minutes later, and from the moment they walked through that door, this stopped being a missing persons case. It became something much darker. Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the public days later with words that left no room for ambiguity. He stated that investigators believed Nancy had been taken from her home against her will. He used the words kidnapping and abduction. He described conditions inside the residence as very concerning and inconsistent with a voluntary departure. Blood was found at or near the entrance of the home. Forensic testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Nancy. Video captured by journalists at the scene appeared to show a trail of blood leading from the front door area outward. And there was one more detail that made this case feel immediately different from a standard missing persons investigation. Nancy Guthrie was not someone who could have wandered off. She was 84 years old, with limited mobility. She had a pacemaker. She required daily medication. She could not walk 50 yards by herself. Whoever took her from that home had to physically move her, and whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case almost immediately. What began as a local search operation involving drones, police dogs, helicopters, and search and rescue teams from U.S. Customs and Border Protection quickly shifted into a full criminal investigation by February 2nd. The house was sealed as a crime scene. Homicide investigators were brought in alongside the original deputies, and the FBI began lending its forensic capabilities, digital analysis tools, and national databases to the effort. Despite all of this, no trace of Nancy was found in the surrounding area, not in the rugged desert terrain around the Catalina foothills, not along the roads leading away from her home, not in any nearby structure or property. She had vanished entirely. And then the ransom notes started arriving, not to the family directly, to the media. On February 2nd, the day after Nancy was reported missing, Cold TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson, received a letter demanding payment for her release. The note reportedly contained specific details about Nancy's home and what she had been wearing the night she disappeared. Investigators reviewed it, shared it with the FBI, and requested that its contents not be publicly disclosed. The following day, TMZ received its own alleged ransom communication. This one demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin and included a specific cryptocurrency wallet address and a deadline. Over the next several days, additional notes surfaced. Harvey Levin, the founder of TMZ, publicly described receiving a letter that stated Nancy was alive but scared, was aware of the demands being made, and that the communication would be the only one from the sender. But neither Levin nor anyone else could confirm whether these notes came from someone genuinely holding Nancy or from opportunists trying to exploit a high-profile case. Authorities acknowledged the notes, but neither confirmed nor denied their validity. And in a detail that former FBI agents found highly unusual, the ransom demands were being routed through media outlets rather than sent directly to the family. That pattern did not match the behavior of a typical kidnapper seeking a controlled exchange. It suggested something else entirely, either a deliberate strategy to create public pressure or the work of someone disconnected from the actual crime. On February 5th, a California man was arrested on federal charges for posing as an abductor and attempting to extort the Guthrie family. Authorities made clear that his scheme was completely unrelated to the legitimate ransom notes that had already gained widespread attention. He was a fraud, operating in the shadow of someone else's crime. But his arrest underscored a troubling reality. This case was attracting not just investigators, but also predators, scam artists, and attention seekers, all circling around the absence of answers. 2 days later, on February 7th, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released a video that sent a message directly to whoever was responsible. In it, Savannah said the family had received the message and understood. She begged for her mother's return, and she said something that no family should ever have to say on camera. She said they would pay. The reported demand was $6 million. The deadline was 5 p.m. on February 9th. That deadline passed. No exchange occurred. No proof of life was ever provided. And then, on February 10th, the FBI released the footage that changed the shape of the investigation entirely. FBI Director Kash Patel posted 4 black-and-white still images on social media showing a masked individual outside Nancy Guthrie's home on the morning she disappeared. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued the same images simultaneously. Later that day, 2 short video clips from the doorbell camera were also released. The footage was recovered from what the FBI described as residual data located in back-end systems. The camera had been disabled, but the data had already been transmitted, and what it showed was deeply unsettling. A figure approaches the front door. They are wearing a dark zip-up jacket, light-colored pants, black gloves, and a full face mask. Strapped to their body is a gun in a holster, placed improperly over the crotch area. On their back is a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack, and clenched between their teeth is a flashlight, illuminating the area in front of them as they move. There is no hesitation in the footage, no nervous scanning of the surroundings, no signs of impulsive behavior. The figure walks directly to the camera, raises a gloved hand, and attempts to knock it off the wall with light taps. When that does not work, they take foliage from a nearby potted plant and cover the lens. Then they turn and move out of frame. Authorities later provided a physical description of the suspect based on the footage. They estimated the individual was between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build, and noted a visible black mustache beneath the mask. The backpack was identified as an Ozark Trail hiker model, sold exclusively at Walmart. Sheriff Nanos called it one of the most promising leads in the case. The mask and clothing were also believed to have been purchased at Walmart, though investigators could not confirm whether the items were bought online or in a physical store, in Arizona or elsewhere. Walmart cooperated with the investigation and provided records of all recent Ozark Trail hiker pack purchases, both in-store and online, covering not just the Tucson area but surrounding regions as well. Investigators spent days reviewing surveillance footage from local Walmart locations, searching for anyone who purchased those specific items. A $10 gun holster, matching the one seen in the footage, was also traced to the retailer. But for all the detail the footage provided, it also raised a question that continues to haunt this case. Why did the suspect walk directly into the camera? A person trying to remain completely anonymous would avoid exposure entirely. They would stay in the shadows, keep distance, approach from an angle. But this individual closed the gap. They stood face to face with the lens, visible enough for investigators to estimate their height, note their build, and identify their mustache. That behavior suggests one of two things. Either they were confident their identity could not be traced from the footage, or they did not fully understand how the technology worked. And if it was the second possibility, then the very moment they tried to eliminate the evidence was the moment they created it. If you are still with me on this journey into one of the most baffling cases in recent memory, I want you to take a moment right now and hit the like button. It helps true crime investigator Alex reach more people who care about these stories, and it tells us that you want to see more deep investigations like this one. Every like and every share brings attention back to cases that deserve it. Following the release of the footage, the investigation entered a phase of intense but largely invisible activity. Leads were pursued, searches were conducted, and one by one, each promising thread led to a dead end. On the evening of February 10th, a person of interest was detained after a traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, roughly 60 miles south of Tucson near the Mexican border. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and FBI executed a search warrant on a property and vehicle in the same area. By the following day, the individual was released without charges. Sheriff Nanos stated the person was determined not to be involved in the disappearance. 3 days later, on February 13th, authorities conducted a large-scale operation at a residence approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. Roads in the surrounding area were closed for about 4 hours. 2 people were removed from the property. One was taken in for questioning and released the following day. Around the same time, a gray Range Rover was seized from the parking lot of a nearby restaurant. It was towed away by investigators. No arrests resulted from any of these actions. The DNA evidence, which many had hoped would be the breakthrough, proved far more complicated than anticipated. A black glove was recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. The FBI confirmed it appeared to match the gloves worn by the suspect in the doorbell footage. Preliminary testing revealed DNA from an unknown male. But when the profile was checked against the FBI's national DNA database and compared to DNA found at Nancy's property, there was no match. Investigators eventually traced the glove back to a local restaurant worker who had no connection whatsoever to the case. It was a false lead. Additional DNA samples were collected from Nancy's property, but the results were mixed, literally. The genetic material recovered contained contributions from more than one person, creating what forensic scientists call a complex mixture. These types of samples are notoriously difficult to separate and interpret. Sources close to the investigation expressed concern that the DNA found at the home might not yield a usable profile for comparison in databases. Genetic genealogist Satsy Moore, one of the most prominent figures in forensic DNA analysis, later commented publicly on the case. She explained that companies working with law enforcement were developing new techniques to deconvolute these complex DNA mixtures, and that the high-profile nature of the Guthrie case had accelerated those efforts. She theorized that at least one company had moved up its release timeline for new mixture deconvolution software specifically because of this investigation. She also suggested that investigators should return to Nancy's home to collect additional swabs, noting that if the perpetrator spent 40 or more minutes inside the residence, it would be almost impossible for them not to have left DNA behind somewhere. Moore also pointed to a specific piece of evidence that she believed held the greatest potential: the Byte flashlight. The suspect in the doorbell footage had been holding a flashlight in their mouth. If that flashlight was recovered, or if it had been dropped or left behind at any point, Moore said the saliva deposited on it could still contain the perpetrator's DNA. She described DNA as hardy, meaning it can survive longer than many people assume under the right conditions, and emphasized that even invisible traces on a surface could be enough to generate a usable profile. But as of today, no breakthrough from DNA analysis has been publicly announced. The samples remain under examination. The mystery remains intact. While the forensic side of the investigation moved slowly, the digital side presented its own set of challenges and opportunities. Investigators asked residents within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's home to submit any surveillance footage they had from January 1st through February 2nd. That request was significant for a reason that many people overlooked at the time. Authorities were not just looking for footage from the night of the abduction. They were looking for footage from the entire month leading up to it. That detail carries enormous implications. It suggests that investigators believed the crime may not have been spontaneous. If the suspect had visited the area before February 1st, if they had scouted the neighborhood, studied Nancy's routines, assessed the positioning of cameras, or tested the timing of when the street was quiet, then evidence of that preparation might exist on someone else's camera. A car that passed by too many times, a figure that appeared on more than one occasion, a presence that blended in at first, but in hindsight, did not belong. Neighbors later told reporters that investigators visited their homes and asked about footage from specific dates, primarily the weekend Nancy disappeared, but also January 11th and January 24th. Those dates have not been explained publicly, but the fact that investigators flagged them suggests they may have identified something in the data, a pattern, a signal, a moment that does not align with the normal rhythm of the neighborhood. Digital forensic teams were also reviewing cell tower data from the area. Every time a phone connects to a cell tower, a record is created. That record logs the device, the time, and the location. By establishing what experts call a pattern of life for the neighborhood, investigators could identify anomalies, devices that appeared in the area but did not belong to any resident. If such a device was found, it could potentially be traced back to its owner, providing a direct link to whoever was in that neighborhood at the time of the abduction. But there was a complication. The Catalina foothills area has poor cellular reception in some spots, and at 2 in the morning, normal cellular traffic is at its lowest, which means fewer data points to work with. The window of opportunity for catching an anomalous signal was narrow. Google, the manufacturer of Nancy's Nest camera system, was working with the FBI and technical engineers to recover as much data as possible from the cameras on her property. On March 18th, it was reported that investigators had successfully retrieved additional images from some of the other cameras at Nancy's residence. However, the newly recovered footage did not show any suspicious activity. The masked figure seen in the doorbell video did not appear in any of the other camera feeds. The previously released doorbell footage remained the only known images authorities had of the suspect. That absence is itself a clue. If the suspect appeared on the doorbell camera at the front of the house, but not on any other cameras covering other angles, it raises questions about how they entered the property, what path they took, and whether they knew exactly where to go to avoid additional surveillance. That level of awareness does not come from chance. It comes from knowledge of the property's layout, either through prior observation or through information obtained in advance. As the weeks stretched into months, the public dimension of the case took on a life of its own. TMZ continued to receive communications from an individual claiming to have information about Nancy's whereabouts. In early April, this person sent new notes asserting that they had seen Nancy alive in the Mexican state of Sonora, which borders Arizona. They demanded 1 Bitcoin in exchange for information that would deliver the kidnappers on a silver platter. They claimed to have been outside the United States for more than 5 years and to have had no involvement in the crime itself. Authorities did not publicly comment on the credibility of these claims, and no verifiable evidence supporting them has been released. Dr. Ann Burgess, a pioneering criminal behaviorist whose work with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit inspired the Netflix series Mindhunter, offered her own analysis of the case during an appearance on News Nation's Brian Entin Investigates program. Burgess suggested that something went very wrong inside the house, pointing to the confirmed presence of blood. She then proposed a theory that shifted the frame of the entire case. She suggested the abduction may have been motivated by revenge, not revenge against Nancy herself, but against someone in her orbit. Burgess posed a pointed question. Who in Nancy's circle, her family, her friends, her broader world, would be hurt the most by this act? The answer, for most people following the case, was obvious. And Burgess described the crime as mean, angry, and horrible, suggesting that if the plan went wrong, the original intent may not have been to do more than abduct her. That theory aligns with a detail that has lingered over this case from the beginning. Nancy Guthrie is the mother of one of the most visible television personalities in America. Savannah Guthrie co-anchors NBC's Today Show, a program watched by approximately 3 million viewers every weekday morning. She is a household name, and if someone wanted to cause maximum emotional devastation to a public figure, targeting their elderly, vulnerable mother would accomplish exactly that. But this is where responsible analysis must draw a clear line. No official motive has been confirmed by investigators. No verified connection between the crime and any theory of revenge has been established publicly. Sheriff Nanos has stated that all of Nancy's immediate family members and their spouses have been cleared as suspects. The investigation remains active, and the facts continue to evolve. What is known is that the Guthrie family has been living through an unimaginable ordeal. Savannah stepped away from her broadcasting duties at NBC immediately after her mother's disappearance. She was supposed to co-host the opening ceremonies of the 2026 Winter Olympics. Instead, she flew to Tucson and immersed herself in the search. She released emotional video messages, pleading for her mother's return. She sat for an interview with her former co-anchor Hoda Kotb that aired in late March, in which she revealed details previously unknown to the public, including that the back doors of her mother's house had been found propped open, and that she believed 2 of the ransom notes the family had received were legitimate. In that interview, Savannah also acknowledged a fear that has haunted her since the beginning. She expressed concern that the abductors may have been inspired to act because of her own fame. That admission carries a weight that no professional achievement or public platform can cushion. The possibility that your mother was taken because of who you are is a burden that defies comprehension. On February 24th, the family announced a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Around the same time, they donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The reward was later increased to $1.2 million. President Donald Trump called Savannah personally on February 4th, offering additional federal resources and expressing hope for a safe recovery. The White House posted information about Nancy on its social media accounts, urging the public to come forward. And yet, despite all of this, despite the massive search effort, the FBI involvement, the forensic analysis, the media attention, the reward money, and the emotional pleas seen by millions, no breakthrough has come. No suspect has been named. No arrest has been made. And Nancy Guthrie remains missing. On April 6th, 2026, more than 2 months after her mother vanished, Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show. She walked onto the set wearing a bright yellow dress, the same color as the ribbons and flowers that had been placed outside her mother's home in Tucson as symbols of hope. Her co-anchor Craig Melvin wore a yellow tie and reached for her hand. Weather anchor Al Roker offered his pocket square when she became visibly emotional. Her first words back on air were simple. She said it was good to be home. And then she said something else that revealed the steel beneath the grief. She said, "Ready or not, let us do the news." In an earlier message to her church community, Savannah had spoken about her struggle with faith during what she called a season of trial. She described moments when life itself seems far harder than death, and spoke of deep disappointment with God and a feeling of utter abandonment. But she also said she still believed, and she made a declaration that cut through the noise of speculation and sadness. She said she would not let the people who did this take her joy. She said her joy would be her protest. Her joy would be her answer. NBC implemented strict procedures for Savannah's return. Producers reportedly arranged for Savannah to be sequestered from the set if any breaking news about the investigation emerged during a broadcast. Another anchor would handle the story on air while developments were discussed with Savannah privately. The network understood that every camera pointed at Savannah was also indirectly pointing back to an empty house in Arizona. And so the case stands at a crossroads. More than 70 days have passed. The evidence collected so far includes doorbell camera footage of a masked suspect, blood confirmed as Nancy's, mixed DNA samples from the property, a backpack traced to Walmart, a glove that led nowhere, cell tower data still being analyzed, and ransom notes of undetermined origin that have produced no verified communication with anyone holding Nancy. Experts in the field remain cautiously hopeful. C.E. Moore believes that advances in DNA mixture deconvolution could eventually produce a usable genetic profile from the evidence at Nancy's home. She has emphasized that if the perpetrator was inside the residence for an extended period, their DNA is almost certainly present somewhere, possibly on surfaces, possibly invisible to the eye, but retrievable with the right techniques and the right technology. Others have suggested that the case may ultimately be solved not through forensic science, but through human disclosure. Someone, somewhere, knows something. The size of the reward, the intensity of the public attention, and the passage of time all create pressure. And pressure changes calculations. A person who is willing to stay silent in the first week may feel differently after the first month. A person who feared retaliation may find courage as time reveals that silence carries its own risks. This is why cases like this demand sustained attention, not just from law enforcement, not just from media, but from people who refuse to let a case go cold while an 84-year-old woman is still unaccounted for. If you are one of those people, and I believe you are because you are still here, then let me ask you to do one final thing. Subscribe to True Crime Investigator Alex. Share this video with someone who has not heard this story, or who has only heard the headlines without the depth. Leave a comment with your thoughts, because this community is built on the idea that attention is the one thing that cannot be taken away from a case like this. As long as people are watching, as long as people are asking questions, as long as people refuse to forget, there is still a chance. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She requires daily medication. She has 3 children who love her. She has a community in Tucson that placed yellow ribbons and flowers outside her home and prayed for her return. She has a daughter who went on national television and told the person who took her mother that she would pay, that she would do anything, that she just wanted her mom back. And somewhere, in a place no one has yet identified, the answers to this case exist. They exist in a fragment of DNA waiting to be decoded. They exist in a file of cell tower data waiting to be matched. They exist in a memory that someone has not yet shared. They exist in a detail so small that it has been overlooked, buried inside a timeline of 41 minutes that changed everything. And if the person who did this is listening, there is one thing every expert, every investigator, and every analyst agrees on. No one executes a crime like this perfectly. There is always a trace, left behind. There is always a moment where the plan slips. And in the age of digital surveillance, Bluetooth signals, DNA analysis, and genetic genealogy, the idea that someone can take a human being from their home and leave nothing behind is not just unlikely, it is impossible. The trace is there. The moment has already happened, and it is only a matter of time before someone finds it. Anyone with information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie is urged to contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has also established a dedicated tip line, and an online form is available for submissions. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home, and the people who love her deserve to know the truth. This has been True Crime Investigator Alex. Stay vigilant, stay engaged, and never stop asking questions.